Hi, I'd like to talk a little bit today about integrating and citing sources. And to begin, I'd like to mention what you probably already know, that the project of higher education is the production of new knowledge, right? So even at teaching institutions like EOU, faculty are required to produce and publish scholarship, research, creative projects. That is, they're asked to contribute new material to their specialties. And so they are in dialogue with experts in their fields across the nation, and also with experts who have produced written texts and other creative works over hundreds of years. So um, the issue of citation is connected to the issue of scholarship at the university level, because we can't publish or draw an audience for our creative work if it's exactly like what other people have done. So our task is to develop new ideas, new knowledge, new information, new creative works. And to do that, we have to know what's come in the past. And so the key to that is active participation in scholarly discourse communities, and active reading of existing materials and exploration of existing materials so that we are well versed enough to know that our contributions are new. So this is what universities do. They protect that process. And that's what academic freedom is for, right? It gives us the freedom as faculty members to engage in our disciplines and continue to try to contribute to them in the best way possible. So when students are asked to write academic papers, they're being asked to approximate the kinds of work that scholars do. And the academic essay is a generic form of the kinds of documents that many scholars produce, right? So published scholarly papers in the fields of science and education and sociology have a similar kind of format, right? They often have some kind of thesis, a theory, a conclusion. They have body paragraphs. They have sections that are appear in an order that would be useful to scholars in that particular field, and they are developed with evidence, right? So when teachers ask students to produce written work, and they are really asking students to be actively involved in preparing for a field that they can participate in as scholars. And this is important whether they go on to grad school or not, right? Because professional work is very similar. You cannot make money, or you shouldn't, off of other people's stuff, right? You have to develop your own, and to do that, you have to know the field. So that's a marketable career-oriented skill, both the writing, the thesis-driven argumentative writing, and the attitude toward the development of new information. So this is why I think, particularly the university level, and therefore also the K-12 system, has become very focused on information texts, because information texts are that backdrop of scholarly work that scholars need to know about. And so when students get to the university, they're asked to process, that is, read and understand scholarly articles. And so the K-12 system has become invested in creating a pipeline toward the university by teaching some of those professional and academic scholarly skills, helping students understand information texts, helping them understand scholarly information texts, reading difficult texts, processing difficult texts, so that when they get to the university, if they choose to go there, they're ready for the level of reading expected. And again, this is because scholars use those kinds of texts for their own backdrop of information about the discipline they're operating in. Okay, so this is the context in which citation happens. right? So as scholars, we locate, we evaluate, we integrate, and we cite sources so that there's a kind of set of breadcrumbs attached to our information that we're presenting to people who are encountering our text. And these skills are very important to establishing that newness, right? That what we're doing is new, it's not a repeat. We can say that we agree with prior scholarship because of research that we've done, but we have to have done that new research. And so the K-12 system actually starts teaching these kinds of skills at the kindergarten level, if you can believe that. So before kids learn to read, they can learn to understand that ideas come from somewhere, right? So when I was working with teachers, as I've done for much of my life, I I asked a kindergarten teacher, like, how do you do that? That's crazy, right? These kids can't even read. And she's like, well, we read a couple different books on Egypt and ask the students where the different bits of information come from, right? So you can read a book aloud, and you can read another book aloud, and then you can ask the kids to say which book had that information in it. And that's a way of like preparing kids to understand the concept of information belonging to people and belonging to texts. Um, and that's the start of the pipeline. Hopefully, by the time students get to college, they understand, that engaging in dialogue with other scholars requires identifying which ideas belong to whom. So that's essentially what citation is, right? It's just announcing this is where I got my stuff from. And it also helps to differentiate the scholar's stuff from your stuff, right? So it's important to be doing that. Okay, so this kind of work is difficult if students struggle with reading, right? So the first step of learning to integrate and cite sources has to do with understanding what you're reading. And if you've struggled with this, I mean, I'm sure we've all struggled with difficult texts at one time or another, but you know that to prepare to write about something, you really have to know it well. And so this is the role of summary. And summary is a tool that writers can use to help themselves, right, to keep track of what they've read. They can also use it in their writing to show that they've understood what they've written. What happens sometimes in student writing is that students will think that to demonstrate they've used a text, they just can cherry pick a quotation and drop it in to their language. I like to call those hit and run quotations, right? You just throw it in there and you run away because you have no idea what the text said. So those are cherry picked quotes. Sometimes they're pulled out of context, right? So if I am a scholar and I have to talk about the past scholarship that influences the work I'm doing that is new, I am going to have to talk about scholarship with which I disagree. So what sometimes happens if students aren't careful, they pull a quote from an article, they claim that that article's author said that, which of course the author did, but they also claim that the author agreed with that, which of course the author didn't, right? Um, so cherry picking quotes out of context from an article isn't good enough because it doesn't demonstrate you understand what you read, which is the point of reading the scholarship. It demonstrates you can put quotation marks around some language, but that's not quite the same thing. So the goal would be not to cherry pick quotations, but to provide some context, some background, some summary before a quotation actually happens. And then the quotation should be something that can only be in the author's words. Like it's so good in their words that we really, really need to have it be in the original. And I always encourage students to talk about the quotation because you may understand the quotation differently from your reader. And so that quotation should be prefaced by other stuff, background on the article from which it comes, and then it should be followed by discussion because your readers may not share your understanding of the language in the quote. So it's kind of like a sandwich, right? There has to be some discussion before and after. And no matter whether that information is summarized or paraphrased or quoted, it has to be cited because it all belongs to somebody else, which is the point of citation. Okay, yeah, nod and smile. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so and for this is for you future teachers, right? In order to teach this stuff, you must take a look at student sources, right? So there's no way to know what the student is doing with their sources unless you as the teacher are spot checking them. And that's on you, right? Because if a student leaves your class having misused sources, that student will think they did it right, and then they'll get to the next class. And if that teacher also doesn't know that the student doesn't understand the difference between paraphrase and quotation, um, then that student may end up in a situation where plagiarism is being charged, right? Because they didn't get it, like no one taught them. So it's really the obligation of the teacher to look at the sources and hold the students' hands and help them use the source ethically. And that is incredibly time consuming. Okay, so just as a reminder, right, these skills are not just to please a teacher. They are so that the writer's voice can be heard against the backdrop of other scholarship, and that scholars in the field can know for sure that those ideas are new and belong to that person, right? So it's really, really important work. Okay, so I want to talk just a little bit about citation, and I'm going to pull up a couple examples. These are from the Purdue OWL. And you will have done stuff like this before, right? You will have looked at this kind of thing. You will have generated this kind of thing. If you're working in Modern Language Association or MLA format, you need to be using the format from 2016 or after because a big change in the format happened in that year. The Purdue OWL does have updated models, so you can trust that they've got the current MLA citation format. But here is a work cited in MLA citation format, and you'll notice, right, that we have author, we have some kind of title, and if it's a book or a long document, it's italicized. If it's an article, it's quoted. Notice that the title is capitalized, right? Most of the words, the small little words are not, but most of the other words are. And there's also some publication information, right? So that's a typical book citation. If there's more than one author, it might use an et al. If it's a government publication, there might be some additional information needed. I'm just going to scroll down and see if I can find one. Okay, so here, right, is a website, right? And the site has, the page is quoted and the site is italicized, right? And there's a URL and an access date. And so that means that this date here is the date it was posted, right, on the internet, or the update date. Okay, let's see. So here, that looks like another website. Let me see if I can find, there isn't one for an article in an anthology, which is like Weaver, which we will be citing. So let me just pull up, going to books, and I'm going to scroll down to, right, work in an anthology, right? So here's the format, right? Last first, title and quotations, article title, author of the article, right? Title of the book edited by, in our case, it's Constance Weaver, the publisher, the year, and the page range, right? So that's what that looks like. And it's important to know how to do that. Another one, we won't need this term, I think, but is helpful and complicated, I'm just going to mention, is articles from databases. And if you're working with the database, hopefully the database can generate the citation for you. So if you're lazy like me, you don't have to work too hard. But there is a format that you can use. Let's see, right? An article from an online database, and this is what it looks like, right? Again, it has the authors of the article, the title of the article, the title of the journal in italics, volume number, the date of the journal, the page range of the article, the database in which it appears, DOI number if it's available, and the access date. Right? Nod and smile. Yeah, that's how you do that. That I think is the hardest citation to do. And I just want you to know that this information is here. Okay. So I want to talk also about what this stuff looks like when it's in a paper, right? So here we're back at this MLA paper, right? And you'll notice that an academic paper has a particular format in MLA style. Academic heading, page number, title, et cetera, but I want you to see what the integration of source information looks like, right? Let's see if I can find a citation, right? So here's a quotation, right? That's coming from Dan Hoff, page 5. And the quotations are there. Notice the punctuation, right? There's no end punctuation until after the in-text citation. Right? So if there is no in-text citation, the punctuation goes inside the quotations. If there is, it goes outside the end citation. Thanks, MLA, for being difficult in that way. Okay, I think it's important also to notice, like this example doesn't do this at all, but I would encourage you in MLA citation format to use an attribution tag like according to Weaver or according to Keel or according to Romano at the beginning of the sentence in which the information from the source appears, or at the beginning of the section in which the information from the source appears, because that will help your reader know that we're moving into some source material. So I'm going to see if there is an example of that kind of attribution tag, but it looks like this isn't working that way. I will encourage you. Oh, here we go. Right, here's one, right? In his published dissertation, The American Agricultural Press, 1819 to 1860, Albert Lothar de Marie presents a description of the general content, blah, blah, blah. Right, so that introduces the author. It provides a little bit of an overview of the source before moving into some more detail. I would encourage that method of citation, again, because it is very clear in separating the ideas of the source, which are beginning here, right, with the according to, from your own ideas, right? And I think getting that separation to be clear is important. Okay, let me try another one. I'll go into the APA. Let me get this set up on the back end. Right, I'm still in the Purdue OWL. Right, so here's a sample paper. Should probably get rid of that ad there. All right. Right, an APA format is a little different. It has a title page. If you're lazy like I am and you don't want to do a title page, don't feel like you have to, but if you want to practice this format, great. I'm happy to help you do that. It has a running head, and notice that the running head doesn't say running head : and then the title. It just says the title of the paper, right, and a page number. So that's the header. And then it has a title page with the title and the information about the author and the place. And then if there's any notes that you need to say about yourself, you can do that. If you'd like to try an abstract is a summary of your own paper. And you'll notice that most of the Weaver articles begin with an abstract. So if you need a model, great. If you don't want to do an abstract, don't do an abstract. It's just something that happens in MLA format. And it's usually about a paragraph long. And then the main paper starts, and notice, right, APA is different from MLA in particular because the American Psychological Association, APA, cares about date. right? So if you're working in the field of literature, it's maybe not so urgent how old your sources are. If you're working in the field of COVID prevention, right, it would be great if your sources were really current, and they will have to be. So notice that according to tag has the date in it, right? So an APA in-text citation usually has the author's name, the date, and the page number. In MLA format, you would use a page number for every chunk of information, regardless of whether it's your words or the author's words. In APA format, you need the page number only if it's a quote. So there's that. Okay, here we have a quote, right? We have a dialogue tag. We have the quote, we have the P period page number. Notice also that APA in the in-text citation uses a P period page number, which MLA does not. MLA doesn't use a comma in the in-text citation. So again, use a handbook because you won't be able, I can't do it all by myself. I usually have to look at something, some model to help me. Right, and here's information coming from Lewis because it's not quoted, it's paraphrased, there's no page number. Right, okay, good. We're gonna scroll down to the end and have a look at the end citation. And remember that APA cares about year, so you'll notice that the year is the second thing after the author's name or names. You probably are also noticing that the author has instead of having the full first name, there's just an initial. And that may be because they're trying to be gender neutral, right? You can't necessarily tell if these are men or women if they have only their initial. Notice too that this is the title of an article, but there are no quotations, and the article title isn't capitalized conventionally. Yay, APA. This is how you sell handbooks, right? You make it really hard to figure out how to do this. So here's the title of the article. Here's the italicized journal article. Notice that in APA format, we have volume 64 and number 3 in parentheses. Those are, one is italics, one is not italicized, and one isn't, right? So this is a scholarly article citation. And then there's a URL for the location of the article. Okay, here's a website, right? So this is an organizational website. We just start off with the organization. There's no date, so it says ND. Here's the title of the website and the URL of the website. Very simple. Let me see if I can find a book. So these are articles. Okay, here's a book, Bloom, right? So here's the list of all the authors, the year of the book. The book is italicized, the title, but not conventionally capitalized. And then there's just the publisher. Okay. So do be careful about the differences between MLA and APA citation format. I want to say just a few other things about the issue of plagiarism, and because many of us may be dealing with those issues in the workplace, we may be dealing with those issues as future teachers. And I've been devoting quite a lot of my scholarly time to thinking about the issue of plagiarism. And so let me just show you a sample. And this is something, I think I made this. It's kind of like a compilation of what students have done in the past. Right, so here is a Kiel summary. The underlined language comes from Kiel. And so this is all plagiarized. All the underlined language is plagiarized, even though we know it's coming from Kiel. The writer has no right to use Kiel's wording. And also, if the writer is demonstrating their knowledge of Kiel's ideas, the writer should be using their own language. Okay, so why does this happen? I guess that's a question, right? So why does plagiarism happen? Sometimes it happens. I mean, it's not because people are trying to be evil, right? Most students aren't trying to cheat the system, right? A few may be cheating themselves, and especially at the university level, that's unfortunate because students are paying for the learning they get. And if they're cheating, they're not paying for the learning. Um, okay, so maybe cheating is a easy way to get through a difficult class, maybe. But usually, in my experience, students end up plagiarizing for a number of other reasons. They may not have taken enough time to work on an assignment or plan an assignment. They may not understand plagiarism. Again, if teachers have not been teaching students to notice it, they may not understand how it works. They may not know how to find and use information coming from sources because maybe their teachers didn't focus on that or didn't know how to do it, or they haven't fully read the source. That's a huge issue, again, that I'll just mention, right? If you don't understand what the source is saying, you're probably going to rely really heavily on the source language because you don't understand it. I mean, another source of plagiarism is the fear of failure, right? If we think it's all going wrong and we don't know what to do, we might just fall back on the crutch of using source language instead of trying to do it ourselves, right? So that can happen. Okay, well, I've noticed a lot of different kinds of plagiarism that result from these different things going on. And I'm just going to show you a table that I developed. Right. So different kinds of plagiarism, right? Obviously, if you're submitting someone else's work, that's intentional. You're trying to get away without learning. And there's lots of ways teachers can prevent this. One way is just to talk about plagiarism and the implications of plagiarism, right? That it's not just cheating someone else, it's cheating yourself out of an opportunity to have a voice in a scholarly discourse community. But teachers can encourage students to revise. I found that students who are using other people's writing can't revise it because they don't really know what it says. Um, Creating assignments that have uh, that are would be hard to find someone else's work to substitute for the student's own, right? So developing a really unique kinds of assignments, asking students to submit their source materials. That's another strategy to encourage students to use their source materials. If they're using an article produced by another person, it's harder for them to go look for the source materials and submit them as well. But more often, I see work plagiarized from others' words, sometimes patchworked from a number of different sources. And I can locate that kind of thing by using a search engine, or if you have access to a service like turnitin.com. And again, modeling, practicing, asking students to demonstrate that they've located their own materials and have understood their own materials, right? So there's where summary comes in handy. Those are all ways to help students avoid falling into this problem, right? Sometimes students patchwork plagiarize from sources they haven't cited. Sometimes they are plagiarizing sources they have cited. Sometimes they put the quotations in and forget to put the citations with the quotations, and the citations and the quotations get mixed and matched, right? So a teacher can't know this without having looked at the student's source materials. Sometimes students will take the ideas of others, right? So instead of coming up with their own argument or own idea about a particular topic, they'll go to the internet, find an idea, and just regurgitate the idea. Again, that's still plagiarism because the ideas belong to others. Sometimes the students, as I said, misrepresent sources, right? They don't quite know what the source says. And I found students sometimes will say exactly the opposite of what the source is arguing. So again, a great way to help students avoid that is to take a look at their sources or require a set of sources. You'll notice in English 316, I'm not asking you to locate your own sources. All of the sources we're using are in the Weaver textbook because it makes it easier for me to help you avoid that kind of stuff. Okay, so given all of that information, right? What are the solutions? I would say, and I'm using, I really learned a lot from an article. Let me see if I can find it. I thought I had pulled it up, but maybe I didn't. Oh, here we go. Okay, so let me show you this article. Um, this is called Writing from Sources, Writing from Sentences by Rebecca Moore Howard, Tricia Service, and Tanya K. Rodrigue. And this is where that idea about summary comes from, that students who are struggling to understand a source may plagiarize at the sentence level because they can't understand it, right? So summary, where students are moving outside the source language to clearly indicate they understand and have mastered the content of the source, is a really important step before heading into the writing, right? So that's why I do quite a lot of summary with students. Other kinds of solutions just include, as I said, talking about plagiarism, modeling strategies, practicing skills like paraphrasing, collecting drafts and handwritten samples from students if you're teaching in person, avoiding generic assignments, right? Make the assignment specific to the work of the class, so students can't just go pull paper off the internet. Assign multiple drafts so you can see the students' ideas growing from draft to draft to draft. Asking for the sources to be submitted, asking for summary, asking students to talk about the context of the quotations they're using, asking students to set their own personal experience apart from the source material. Some students have a wide expertise and they want to include it in the paper, but it sounds like plagiarized information. That's a moment to use the first person, I, right, and claim that that experience belongs to them and the expertise that they're deriving comes from, growing up on a wind farm or whatever it is. And having students read one another's papers, right? So there's a lot of great stuff that can happen when students model for one another how to integrate sources so students can see how to do it from each other's work. So thanks very much for listening to this information. I look forward to working with you regarding integrating and citing sources, and I hope that you'll keep this in mind in the situations in which you are asking others to work with source materials, whether that's in the classroom or in the workplace. Have a great day.